Hola a todas y a todos, gracias por acompañarnos en este workshop en vivo de Nerdearla 2021. Esperamos que estén disfrutando y aprovechando las charlas y talleres que se están realizando. En esta oportunidad nos acompaña Jonathan Tissot, que presentará su workshop Well Architected Framework. Jonathan es Senior Site Reliability Engineer para MajorKey Tech. Proporciona su conocimiento y experiencia a los clientes para mejorar no solo la confiabilidad, sino también la resistencia y los costos de las nubes públicas, privadas e híbridas. Es un profesional certificado en las 3 principales plataformas en la nube, Amazon Web Service, Google Cloud y Azure, y posee certificaciones para varias otras tecnologías como Kubernetes, Terraform, RedHat y muchas otras. Les recuerdo que pueden realizar sus preguntas, comentarios o consultas en el chat durante la presentación del workshop, que las iremos anotando para acercarlas y que las puedan responder durante o después de su exposición. Muchas gracias, Jonathan, por ser parte de Nerdearla 2021. El espacio es todo tuyo.
Muchísimas gracias, David. All right, so this workshop will be in English. That's in order to not leave anyone out. I know that there could be people here that might not speak Spanish entirely, so I will be holding this workshop in English. I hope that doesn't bother you. Most probably, if you're here, you're well versed, at least listening. I will try to keep my best version of speaking English. So, as David said, indeed, I'm a senior site reliability engineer. I've been working for MajorKey Tech for a year and a half now, or something like that, and I've been an SRE for over 4 years. Let me get this. There you go. Now, you might want to know what in the earth an SRE is, right? So, SRE is a set of principles and practices that incorporates aspects of software engineering and applies them to infrastructure and operational problems. The main goals is to keep scalable and highly reliable software systems. It was a term coined by Ben Stoss at Google back in 2003. Aside from that level definition, I will do the honorific mention that the SRE, aside from observability, automation, and such, needs to take care of the toil. Reducing the toil is one of the main concerns. That's why basically we are here. As you can see in the presentation, there are all my certifications right now. I'm planning on tackling the RedHat certified engineering next week. I have 3 dogs. I love to play games, and I actually like to play sports, but yeah, my parents actually wanted me to keep this way. I wanted to introduce myself before I'm turning my camera off so I can speak freely. As David said, please raise your questions during this workshop in the chat, and I will be answering those at the end of this workshop. If you have any questions regarding myself, you can look me up on the internet, or you can make your questions in the chat. All right, let's continue. So there are a few common questions before jumping in. What is the AWS well-architected framework? And I will be tackling each one of them individually. So the AWS well-architected framework is certainly not a runbook. So this is not a manual on how you should build something in the cloud, nor in AWS. And most certainly, it is the acronym for well-architected framework is WAF as well. So please don't mix that up with the web application firewall. So we discussed what it's not. Now, what is it? So AWS well-architected framework is a set of resources from AWS that will allow you and your customers leverage the services and architectures that are available in any cloud provider. And as we will be working towards the AWS one, every cloud provider has to come up with some similar thinking. So there are a lot of services that are pretty similar. There are a few exceptions, but we will not get into those exceptions right now. So we will target their services. So we will be talking about AWS services during this workshop, but just for the sake of simplicity. And it is basically the cloud provider that has the most market share, and most probably you're aware of it. But please keep in mind that this is a useful mindset to have with any cloud provider. Now, what's the idea of this workshop? So we from MajorKey Tech and Oriela, we are looking for you to grasp the basics and, if possible, the most advanced understanding of the well-architected framework. We want you to leave this workshop having the tools and knowledge to perform your own analysis or help your customers reach that height. I think there is no need to mention that knowledge is not the same as wisdom. You might know that tomato is a fruit, but you won't put a tomato in a fruit salad. So treat carefully when you're doing this kind of analysis. So when someone trusts you to do a task like this one, like thinking on how you are going to have a well-architected platform, you need to know that they are putting a lot of faith. And by faith, I'm actually talking about effort and money in you, and you need to act accordingly. You can never be thorough enough, but you can do a never-ending analysis. So you need to think about the consequences of the things that you are going to propose, but you cannot take that much time that the proposal that you are thinking will actually get obsolete. We will be analyzing the 5 pillars of the framework to help us or our customers in basically build and deploy faster platforms, lower or mitigate the risks, make informed decisions, and learn AWS best practices. Again, even though I'm mentioning learn AWS best practices, this applies to any cloud provider. So from now on, I will referring as if we are targeting always a customer. But remember, this will help you, your manager or your teammates, to be more aware of where you are currently sitting on. As a side note, this workshop is not to discuss all of the AWS services. We will visit some, but what I would love to is for you to get the concepts. This is something that is intended for architects. You might not yet have that experience, or you might not be in a role that will allow you to do this kind of analysis. But if that's the case, this will prove worthy for you anyhow, as it will help you understand the basic aspects of cloud provider architecture and what to think about while doing something there. So are we going to do an exercise? This is the part of the workshop, right? So the time will not be on our side. While I'm talking about this presentation, I don't want to skip any part of it. I will certainly mention, once we are in the pillars, a few key questions that you could ask. So there are a few questions that are pretty much general and will help guide the conversation. And at the end of the presentation, anyhow, I'm providing the links and all the resources where you will be able to get the tools to make your own analysis. All right, but please, during this workshop, just try to pay attention, make your questions, and try to keep your mind ready to get on a new mindset if maybe you don't have it yet. Are we going to get this super cool presentation? So this presentation will only have 1% of what we will discuss. And we will. I'm just sharing this presentation, and I was talking with David just before this workshop to see if I will be able to share that presentation. But if I don't have any official means, please reach out to me, and I will share it with you. But anyhow, as I said, this will be only 1%. I'm going to talk a lot. This is a lot of theoretical aspects that you will be able to hear from myself. So please pay attention. That will be the most important thing. So let's continue talking about what's the most important thing around. So one of the most important things, and I mentioned this in the previous slide, is mindset, right? And I'm just trying to create a meme out of here. So think about yourself. Why it's mindset, right? So for example, think about yourself moving to a new house, and you might not be able to recognize every single room of it. So have you seen the difference, for example, when you are renting an Airbnb, or you're seeing an Airbnb pictures, and what you encounter once you reach there? So you come in and you start trying to match the photos on the house, trying to find a resemblance, which are sometimes uncanny. And that's the learn part. We need to learn what we are, where are we, right? And we might have the concepts, or we might have the architecture in our mind, but we need to learn what actually that is, right? It's just switching from pictures to reality. And the measure part, on the other hand, right? We will discuss these three concepts: learn, measure, and improve. And once there, you can start understanding where you are trying to make amends with the difference, and you start thinking how your 30-day stay will be, what you need to take into consideration, maybe about sunlight, hot or humid environment, or cold environment, or the heater takes too long to get to the right temperature, fridge not working properly, or maybe you don't have enough space for your clothes or your beverage. So, and that's when you start measuring where you currently are, right? And you start understanding your environment. Now you start thinking how to improve your everyday stay, because let's say that you reserve that for 30 days, and yeah, you paid before. Now you need to try to improve that situation, right? So for example, if there is a humid actual environment, you're going to maybe open the windows, or you're going to set the AC to a lower temperature, and you're going to try to keep your stay there as comfortable as possible, right? And you want to have your best days in the Airbnb that you rented. Yeah, I had a lot of issues with Airbnb. That's why I'm talking about this. And that will be the improving part, right? Although you can always keep in mind that your customer could think of, if something is not what I expected, I should switch to another Airbnb. Remember that doing something like that in a trip that you planned usually gets quite expensive. You do not get the same discounts, or you might not even have availability, or you might end up in a place where you really don't want to be. And that happened to me as well. This is an analogy, and this is the same when we are talking about the cloud, right? Your customers started or moved to the cloud, and when they arrived, they were not fully aware of all the services at their disposal, and one usually switches almost immediately to what's known instead of unknown, right? So, and there are a lot of talks here in Nordiala right now, and there was one before mine, and it's one ongoing, or will start soon, regarding serverless architectures or platform as a service. But customers, when they are moving to the cloud, if they are not there yet, they usually think about infrastructure as a service, EC2, just plain EC2s. And a lot of EC2s. And they are going to infrastructure as a service instead of thinking about leveraging platform as a service or software as a service even. So now explaining the AWS service is not something that will grant us an award, right? So explain to our customers, hey, this is the AWS service that you can basically put code there and it will run. You don't need to care about the server, or this is how you're going to handle a queue and whatnot. So here's the twist, right? We do not only want to make our customer aware of the services, as that will not necessarily add value, but we want to learn, really learn, what is driving their business. What are the pain points that they have? We need to help them learn how they are currently doing things, as they might be even unaware of that. And again, that is all the learn part from the analogy, right? We need to understand, and we need to learn, and we need to see, and that's the learn part, right? But then we need to make sure that what we are trying to improve is being measured, right? If you can measure it, you can improve it. And that's Peter Drucker. How they are measuring their success, how they are measuring their defects, SLAs, SLOs. So KPIs, so key performance indexes, service level indicators, service level objectives, service level agreements, anything like that. So is there any kind of measurement, right? And just after that, after we help our customers learn about where they are, what they are, why they are, and even how they are, we can start thinking with all the details that we got about how to improve their platform to make it useful to them. And that's of huge importance. I love to do some serverless, Gates, Python, Golang, whatever, right? So, but is that suitable for them? Not all customers require a durability of 11 nines. Not all customers require an availability of 5 nines, and not all customers require the platform to be globally reachable. And even some of them will actually prohibit that from happening due to audits. And I'm telling you that because I've been working in a lot of industries. So I've been working with credit card, I've been working with pharmaceutical, health, everything. And every single customer that I've worked with, they had their own world. They needed to take care of their own platforms in a different way than another, and they cared about maybe having 11 nines of availability, and that's something that is pretty much the standard when you're talking about credit cards. But then there are a few that they don't care having maybe a day of a downtime, right? And actually, that will be, maybe you could have an 11 nines of availability in the main platform, but maybe satellite platforms could have maybe 3 nines of availability. So learn, measure, and improve. That should be your mindset when we start talking with our customers. And we need to do it right, as it will be your legacy, right? We are not pavimenting a path that will be walked once, but we are striving to make it as everlasting as possible. We are trying to create something that will endure the test of time, right? So what are the pillars of a well-architected framework, right? There are 5 pillars, and there is a lot to discuss here. So aside from the general analysis that we will do on our customers' architecture applications, we need to always keep in mind these 5 pillars. Why? Easy. Because these pillars are a summary of topics that, after learning and measuring, will help us pin down in every aspect what can we improve and how. It's a quinfecta, and quinfecta is where there are 5 items. I actually had to look that word to success in what we are trying to achieve. So forgetting any of these pillars, no matter the customer, will never be as good as keeping these 5 in mind. So let's do a simple overview of them. We will be doing a double click on each of them. And in that sense, I will be sharing with you a few questions that are normally associated with that pillar to ask your customers or your team, right? So operational excellence is the basic understanding if the current architecture currently works, right? If it will work in the future, or if there is any major change that needs to be addressed. Maybe you are jumping between 10 customers and 1 billion customers overnight, which will be quite all right. And maybe you will need to undergo a requirement that needs your data to be totally stateless because you don't want to save any kind of data, which will be weird, but could happen. Maybe you need to split your system between sad and happy systems. Happy and sad is a definition for security, where sad is the one that has the most critical information that you need to keep secure. And to avoid going through an everlasting audit, because if you don't split those systems and you got an audit, they will basically audit all your systems. Or to hold on maybe to any certification like PCI, HIPAA, etc. So what's the effort of keeping this architecture fully functional, right? What's the effort of deploying new versions on top of this platform? So what does the CI/CD looks like, for example, right? Are you able to even have them, right? That's operational excellence. Security, as the second pillar, I've started with operational excellence because you usually start there. You can actually start by any of these pillars. You usually start in the operational excellence because it tackles right to the point, right to the bone. And you will get a really good overview, right? But again, remember, we need to keep all 5 pillars, and every pillar focus on something particular, right? Operational excellence, let's say it's the more general one from my point of view, but you're gonna start your analysis on any of these topics, and if your customer requires something related to security, most probably you are going to start there because, again, remember, this is about learning and understanding your customer. So let's go with security. Security is one of the hardest topics on the matter, and there are several books, courses, certifications, and whatnot regarding security. But we will summarize this as that your customer's architecture should only do what they are intended to do and nothing else. All right. Whatever other purpose will be considered a breach. So keep that in mind. It's anything that is outside of what is expected to do, that's a breach from the security perspective. Reliability is pretty much about just two simple topics. Will your system work no matter what's going on? If some chaos monkeys, and you can read up about the Simian army from Netflix, it's a really nice thing. But if some chaos monkey hits it with a bat, right? Hits server with a bat, will it recover quickly? The architectures should work no matter what. Not like you can say, yeah, well, it will work under normal pressure and temperature conditions. We need to think our architectures being scalable enough, being able to handle a peak in the traffic. And remember, here is being scalable enough, not being fully scalable, or that you can, yeah, I will jump to 1 billion users, because maybe your customer's not looking for that, right? So this is just about enough, right? About the needs of your customer. Remember that, because maybe I mentioned something and you might think, oh, I need to make all my platforms need to be fully scalable. No, maybe not, right? Maybe just one simple task running somewhere that cannot scale at all. Maybe that's all right for your customer. Do always think on how to make your architecture scalable. There are several approaches that will help you out in the future, and there are a few handful more that will help you modify it without the need of refactoring the entire architecture. But just a small subset of it. Think about self-healing when you're talking about reliability. So obviously, this doesn't mean let's drop 100 nodes in a Kubernetes cluster or 1,000 EC2 instances. Doesn't mean that we want to have idle capacity. It means that we need to keep in mind this aspect. We don't need to create an architecture to handle, again, 100 million users, for example. When the market, maybe your customer market is less than 1% of that, right? So I'm saying that because, again, that's where performance efficiency kicks in, right? We need to reduce the waste. And that's why all the pillars are interconnected, and all of them are important because they are usually controlling each other. Then cost optimization, right? Cost optimization is self-explanatory. There is a new approach called FinOps that basically tackles this on top of every other pillar. And always remember to see the hidden cost. This is when there are some customers that I have worked with that might think that the cost that AWS has versus their company are all reduced to CapEx, OpEx, so capital exchange, operational exchange, and they are just getting the AWS calculator, putting the price there, and they are thinking about how many servers they need in their on-premises, right? But there are a lot of hidden costs, right? Maintaining your own database means that you will require someone to think about the OS, update, upgrade it appropriately, perform maintenance tasks. So you need to think about the availability and durability of the data and whatnot. And those are a lot of things that will be handled when you are going, for example, for a platform as a service. And those are hidden costs, right? Because there are some customers that they are not thinking about how many people do we need to have this, and what is the cost of replacing someone that knows something specifically, and those are usually costs that the customer is not that aware of, right? So let's talk about some general design principles. So stop guessing your capacity needs, right? Just overall, think how your platform will grow. Think about decoupling. Several services can help on that regard, either AWS managed or deployed by you. As an example from AWS, EventBridge, SQS, MKS, that will be Kafka, so on and so forth. Test systems at production scale. This is something that usually goes overlooked. We are in a time where we could actually test everything at production scale. Obviously, this will come with a cost, right? But you will need to, again, you will need to learn and you will need to measure this stuff. We can do capacity testing in environments that are not production, but with the production. We can create that. And we can see if it is scalable enough, if it is reliable enough. Even you can introduce your own risk and maybe your operations like the chaos monkey. So think about, keep that in mind, right? Automate to make architectural experimentation easier. Again, yeah, this is about right. We're at a stage where everything can be automated. CI/CD is not an exception. We can do really complex CI/CD pipelines to help our code get tested in non-production environments. Allow for evolutionary architectures, right? For this point, we need to consider in not closing our platform that much that we will avoid helping it to evolve. And you might, in your career, you might have encountered something like this, that a platform is built in a way that is so close that there is, for example, APIs, right? The APIs is something that is so good, so or GraphQL, right? Which was developed by Facebook anyhow. APIs, right? Create something that could actually help you make it evolve. Think about, and this comes about, think about the coupling, right? So try to make your platform as modular as possible will be the concept here. And remember that when an architecture is coupled, you can interact with the services, appending new ones by creating data pipelines. Data pipelines is something that is really cool. You might have seen that if you have worked with observability a little bit. And you could do some really good breakthroughs having that in mind. Drive architectures using data. In the cloud, you can collect data on how your architectural choices affect the behavior of your workload, right? You can measure practically everything. So this lets you make fact-based decisions on how to improve your workload. Your cloud infrastructure is code, so you can use that data to inform your architecture choices and improvements over time. Failure is not defeat, learn from it. This is now self-helping guide, I'm not sure. So switch gears, sometimes leaves a gap. And remember, as architecture goes, there are major components, not only technical, but humans, all right? There will be errors, but as we will go through all the pillars, and you will see this because repetition is key, modular, decoupling, availability, reliability, and whatnot, you will be able to help create an environment that will survive those failures, and you will be able to incorporate them into new iterations, right? Now, remember, and we mentioned this in this slide, right? Allow for evolutionary architectures because your architecture will evolve eventually. So let's get into the good thing. So let's start with the first pillar, that will be operational excellence. Operational excellence has its own design principles, such as perform operation as code. So this is infrastructure as code, Terraform, Pulumi, CloudFormation, Azure Resource Manager if you're using Azure, any configuration management tool, Ansible, Chef, Puppet, version control systems, GitHub, GitLab, yeah, basically those. Bitback as well, and you can use code commit, and I will be mentioning a lot of them. This helps keeping everything documented, right? Every change, and please keep your code commented, right? And remember these things, and to have this in mind. Make frequent small reversible changes. That means they are easier to roll back, they are easier to track. We do not need to go big bang anymore, right? I remember when I was when we were moving a mainframe for one of the companies that I worked, that we had to basically do a big bang with the mainframe. That was crazy. Obviously, if you tackle the mainframe now, it will be the same situation, but we are trying to make architectures that are modular, right? Think about deployment methods, right? Canary, blue-green, rolling batches, all at once, they're all lost. And this will allow you to pick the best deployment method for your customer, right? Again, so there are, if you put this in a matrix, canary, blue, green, rolling batches, all at once, they will have different times. All at once will be super fast. It will be super risky, right? And it will be super cheap because you are basically removing everything and putting everything back again. As you go with rolling batches, it will improve. It will have less risk. It will be a little bit more expensive, but it will take more time. And if you think about canary and blue green, obviously they will be the most expensive because you basically will have the architecture duplicated, and it will take time because you need to actually measure what's going on there. But again, your risk is almost zero. Obviously, you need to take into consideration that the application will be separated or will be split between front end, back end, and database. If you are using a SQL database, you need to tackle the schema part. If you are changing the schema, obviously this will allow you with some additional risk, but I'm not going to talk about that specifically this time. But please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions regarding that in that regard. Refine operations procedures frequently. That means iterate. As your customers keeps on doing frequent small reversals changes, you will be able to improve their operations. Okay. We talked about this already, but just for the sake of repetition. Anticipate failure. Yeah, well, anticipate failure is know that you will, this comes again, right? Know that you will fail, but try to make it, think about, hey, yeah, well, this will fail, how I'm going to maybe have in place a self-healing capability, how I'm going to maybe switch the traffic to somewhere else, or how your platform is going to react to something like that. Remember, even though this is a key point more from the reliability pillar, this goes here as well because, yeah, it's the emotional pillar for me. Learn from all the operational failures. Failure is there for us to improve, not necessarily something in the present, but check the past. All right. So there might have been a lot of failures in the past that you might not be aware of. And it's a good thing, hey, to ask the question, hey, what have failed before, right? Or what were your pain points, right? Maybe they had some big issue that never happened again, and you might learn from that. So from the operational excellence pillar, there are a few questions I will be mentioning. I will mention 4 or 5 questions regarding the operational excellence pillar. Again, in this presentation, you will have the links to get to the full questions that they are basically posted in AWS in not the best format, but yeah, it's good enough. So, for example, questions that you will ask your customer for the operational excellence pillar is, how do you determine what your priority is? What your priorities are? So, how do you understand your success? How do you measure your success, right? Is maybe you have a gaming company, is the number of players playing simultaneously, or maybe the numbers of different players that are connected within a month, or maybe you are selling something, right? And it is the amount of boxes that you sell or the amount of orders that you got, right? Because maybe there is something that is related to IT, and maybe it is something that's related to an internal process that they have that might not be related with IT because they have maybe a time to manufacture things. Now, how do you design your workload so that you can understand its state? That's another thing that needs to be asked, right? Is how do you think, or how do you plan on having your workload observed, right? So, and here comes observability that we might talk about it a little bit later, about metric logs and trace and whatnot. And how do you design, right? And what are the metrics that you could get out of it? Another question will be, how do you reduce defects? How do you ease remediation? And how do you improve flow into production, right? So you need to always adopt approaches that improve the flow of changes into production and that enable refactoring, fast feedback on quality, and bug fixing. And another question, this will be the last one, because if not, we will be here until 4 p.m. GMT -3. If I keep adding that kind of notes, it will be 6 p.m. How do you mitigate deployment risk, right? So, for example, we talk about the methods of deployment. Do you have something that is a blue-green or canary release, canary testing, sorry, in place, right? Those are some of the questions. Again, I will share the link, but I wanted to just to be aware that there are a few questions that relate to the operational excellence and that will help you guide this conversation with your customer or with your team even to learn more from it and be able to define this new architecture. So let's switch to security design principles. So here, implement a strong identity foundation. Remember the less privileged principle, which is super simple to implement on AWS. It's basically super simple to implement in Azure and GCP. In Azure, I had a few, ins and outs, but it is anyhow. It is super simple. Airbag is in place, so it's super easy to do. So try to keep. I usually go for an SSO. For an SSO architecture, when I'm talking about any cloud provider, I actually hate to have 10 AWS accounts and have 10 users. So SSO is super simple to set up right now. This goes as well with Azure, even though Azure it is not good at working with third parties like Okta, but you can use Azure Active Directory to do so if you're only using Azure. If not, it will be a madness. But anyhow, enable traceability. This is Trails, right? And traceability, even though we are usually talking at least when I'm talking about traces from the observability perspective, I usually talk about the application traces. So how your application works and what connects to where and how much time and what maybe if you got an error in the middle. But here is not that, right? So here is security trails. Be sure that you have accountability on every single task that is done, right? Apply security at all layers. Remember the shared responsibility model from AWS. If you don't know it, it is super simple. There is part of the responsibility that's part from AWS, and there is another thing that the customer is responsible for. AWS, for example, in the most basic scenario, in the infrastructure as a service, they will handle the security in the on-premise, in the data center, the physical security and whatnot. But again, you will need to apply your OS patches. You will need to keep your OS up to date. You will need to be sure that your server is not publicly accessible, or if it is, be sure that you have a really, really long or multi-factor authentication, really, really long password. That's the shared responsibility model. So take care of your surroundings and make sure to enable multi-factor authentication. This is for real. I've seen a lot of companies that they are not using MFA. They have their root accounts on AWS, for example, and totally naked. Let's say, please make sure that you are implementing MFA. And if you have an AWS organization, so you can create an SCP that will apply the same thing and will enforce MFA for everyone. Automate security best practices. So here's the thing, right? I said that automation is super easy nowadays, and there are a few services from AWS like CloudTrail, Audit, Macy, GoDaddy, that will help you out to automate it and keep everything tied together, right? So checking security is usually really lengthy, and you're spending a lot of time and effort on doing so, and you might not even be taking the current picture because of by the time that you might be checking the 10th account, the first one might have changed. So automation is always good, right? SRE. Protect data in transit and at rest, right? And this is important. SSL, CPS, KMS, and so other services help your customers to keep their data secure. This means apply encryption to every single thing that you have out there? No, this means, hey, analyze, learn, measure, and think what you need to actually have encrypted, right? There are some audits that will require certain data, and you might need to be aware of those audits and establish the KMS. But maybe your customer is not. It's normal. Keep people away from data, right? Less privilege to the maximum, right? So why someone will require to have access to the data? Always analyze those cases, all right? Use airbag, but think about why would you need to have access to production data? Is this really needed, right? Do you really need to access this? Or maybe you encounter someone that has access to AWS accounts, maybe even as a read-only, but maybe they don't even use AWS. So why would you even have read-only? So this is why less privilege principle to the maximum, right? Prepare for security events, and this is super important, right? Even though you could have done everything to keep your data and application secure, always have a backup plan, right? We saw this a few years ago, and it's happening, I think, that every year nowadays, where you see a ransomware, right? And someone that was from even the security department, they opened a PDF that said invoice, and there you go, everything to the trash. That shouldn't happen if you have set up proper measurements, but until you reach there, please have a backup plan. So, and backup, it's it's in both senses. Let's talk about now the reliability design principles. This is super fun. So automatically recover from failure, and this is called self-healing. This is called self-healing because when a service stops working or stops responding, or it shows us not healthy, obviously you need to actually have a metric that shows you that, right? And maybe it seems that it is healthy because it is responding to a ping, let's say, but maybe it's actually giving all 400 errors because it doesn't have access to the NFS, for example, or to a PVC. So you need to be aware that you need to have that metric in place for your system to have self-healing capabilities. Reliability doesn't mean that issues will not happen. Reliability is that if they happen, you will be able to recover from them quickly. Design for resilience. Be sure to be monitoring your servers appropriately. Test recovery procedures. Well, this is again self-explanatory. So have or define a procedure to do test the recovery of the services. I will certainly recommend you to read about Netflix Simian Army. I'm talking about it again because it's a really cool topic. But they have this automation in place that will actually break havoc in their infrastructure, and there should be something that will automatically fix that, right? And it is super randomized. It is fun. Scale horizontally to increase aggregate workload availability. Instead of a huge, this is self-explanatory, but it's important for me to mention this. Instead of a huge instance, try to distribute the workload into several smaller ones. You need to design to scale without an issue. Try to think about the stateless. Sticky sessions is one hell of an enemy, and remember that. So that's why you have a lot of options for in-mem databases. So this will be a scale out, not a scale up. Stop guessing capacity. Back again, let's say to the same thing. Try to reduce the idle resources. Measure everything. Test your system at production scale. If you test your system at production scale, you will be able to understand how many resources you will need, right? How many resources you will need in an everyday basis. So you will have your baseline set up, and you will understand your peaks. You will be able to learn and understand if your platform is able to handle those peaks. Manage change in automation. As mentioned in my presentation slide, we need to keep always in mind writing this as code. Again, infrastructure as code, configuration management. We have a lot of things that will actually help us to make everything in an automated fashion from the code. Now, from the platform perspective, try to put everything in an automated way, right? You can leverage Jenkins, GitHub Actions, AWS Code Pipeline, Azure, DevOps pipelines, Flag CD, Argo CD, Harness. There are just a lot of platforms. There are many choices for you to avoid your customers a lot of pain due to a wrongly executed change. We are always trying to, even though we are humans and we tend to do things, we are trying to not doing things. So for the next pillar, we will be talking. We are talking now about performance efficiency. So the design principle for this, let me say, democratize advanced technologies means leverage on AWS to do the heavy lifting. Setting up a Kafka cluster, although it's super easy to do it with the string separator and Kubernetes. Let's just use MKS. Elastic, same thing, right? Multi-master NoSQL, you can use Dynamo. Go global in minutes, right? It's basically use edge locations. User regions. Your customer doesn't need to have a collocation anymore. You can remove those physical barriers. If you need to be close to your users, it is super easy to do so. Use serverless architecture, right? Serverless stresses the concept of a platform as a service. It is the best. It is the best example of what everything will look like in the future. A lot of things that will be done, and there will be nothing that you need to care beneath it, right? Although, yeah, I know that I'm jumping straight ahead. I'm not sure what will happen in 5 days, right? In 5 years. I didn't know that COVID will happen. Here we are. Experiment more often means that, as mentioned before, cloud provider services evolve at a pace that is really hard to grasp, right? If you have the chance, check what's new, how that will impact your customer business or bills, and whatnot. As you have seen already, I'm certified in a few cloud providers, and it is really hard for me to keep my mind on the newest of the newest. I usually do that once a month to check what's new in general, what are breakthrough changes. Obviously, if there is any summit, it is good to assess. There are usually a lot of really good changes there. Experiment more often is something that, aside from what you're going to, that this helps to have a well-architected framework and whatnot, it is something that you should do if you are an SRE or a DevOps. Consider mechanical sympathy, and this is super important. This is I cannot this is not an understatement. Consider mechanical sympathy is keep the user in mind, right? I might have said this before, but not because you love Kubernetes, Ansible, serverless, means that everything needs to be like that, right? Think about relieving the user from the task, reducing the toil. Anything related to self-healing is great, but you are not going to put a lot of stress in whomever is going to handle the platform later down the road if you're not there anymore, right? So again, I'm saying Kafka is free in it. If you're working with a medium company that they might not have the knowledge and they will have a hard time trying to find someone that knows Kafka aside from you, yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe you could go with something different, right? So keep that in mind when you're talking when you are creating this architecture. So last pillar with this cost optimization. I just jumped across all of them without sharing with you any questions. Well, I will go back to the other pillars as soon as I finish this one, since I'm here. Cost optimization design principles. Practice cloud financial management. Be aware of what capital expenditure is and operational expenditure is. Understand the difference between them, and try to, again, if you are doing an analysis on how much it will cost in any cloud provider, be aware of the hidden costs that are there. All right. Adopt a consumption model. All right, with the cloud, the on-demand consumption model appeared, but that doesn't mean that's the only one. All right, you can think of reservations, which will lower the cost, and spot instances. For this, you need to really learn and measure your customer workloads. Not everything needs to run in an on-demand instance. Not everything needs to run in a reserved instance. And not everything could run in a spot instance that will basically disappear overnight without basically telling you anything. Measure overall efficiency. Measure overall efficiency. It will be, have you right-sized your instances and services? You can check CloudWatch metrics, CPU, memory, and storage. Stop spending money on undifferentiated heavy lifting. That means, do your customers really need to take care of handling how to handle a message queue, how to handle an email relay, a Kafka, an Elastic Stack, a Kubernetes cluster, whatever? Let your cloud provider do the effort for you. Then your team or your customer's team will be able to spend some time improving instead of operating. And that's, remember, removing the toil, one of the key things. Analyze and attribute expenditure. Tag your resources. This is the key point. Tag your resources, if not tagged. Be frequent, AWS budget and cost explorer. Understand, take your time to understand where the cost is allocated. And if you're in a multi-tenant, rely on other platforms to understand the current usage of your resources, right? For example, case. Now, since we have went through the 5 pillars, and I missed a few questions on the other pillars that we have here, I will start reading a few from the security, so you understand basically what you will encounter in the links that I have provided. For example, one of the questions, the first one that you need to ask is, how do you manage credentials and authentication, right? Do you have a piece of paper here in a book? Do you have a one password with a DIN where you will be sharing with everyone the root account and you have the MFA there? That will be the first question. The second one is, how do you control human access, right? And this goes in line with defined business requirements to reduce risk and lower the impact of unauthorized access. If an administration is logging in, how do you control that, right? Are they using roles? They have some credential that is basically, they are basically rotating, right? A third question, I will be doing just 4 questions for each, for the sake of simplicity and not having you with your head explode by the end of this workshop. The other question will be, how do you control programmatic access, right? Are you sharing the same key to every single, you have the same key set up in every single CI/CD pipeline that you might have, or in any script, or are you running that with roles? Are you running OpenID Connect? For example, if you have, if you are using Prometheus and Thanos has the ability to leave the metrics in an S3 bucket, and Thanos runs in a container, which could run in EKS, and you could basically put the role in the worker nodes for Thanos to connect to S3. But that means that any pod that is running within that node will be able to access S3. So instead of that, you might as well use OpenID Connect, which means that you could actually create an account in AWS, and your pod will authenticate with it, and it will access that resource because it has the ability to do so through the service account. How do you detect and investigate security events, right? Again, this is traceability, right? You need to understand, and you need to be fully aware of what's going on in your environment, and you need to have that traceability from the audit, from the trails. I mean, that will actually help you identify what's going on. So for the reliability, reliability again encompasses the ability of a system to recover from infrastructure or service disruptions So one of the questions will be, how do you manage service limits? All right. So there is a thing that you will encounter when you are working with AWS. If you haven't, is the service limits. So you have service limits or quotas where you will be able to create 5 VPCs, and then you need to request an upgrade, right? And there are other service limits regarding to all, and you have 2 limits, right? And you have the soft limit and the hard limit. Soft limit means that you issue a ticket and you ask, hey, I want this limit to be increased, and from one moment to the other, you will have that approved. But there are some hard limits that you cannot change. And even though you cry at AWS support, they will say, hey, well, yeah, we cannot do anything for you. So how do you handle those, right? Both of them. Do you have anything that automates the requirement when you're reaching certain threshold to upgrade your limits? And if it is a hard limit, how you are going to modify that? So for example, if you're hitting a bandwidth issue, are you going to split another internet gateway? Are you going to create something else that goes outside of that availability zone? Or are you going to, what are you going to do, right? How are you going to react? Another question will be, how do you manage your network topology? So this is something network. Let me drink something because my mouth is super dry. I've been talking nonstop for an hour, so there you go. So how do you manage your network topology? And this is a question that it is really important for you to be with the latest news regarding that topic. This is something that usually changes. Network at GCP level, I really love how they have implemented the network, because the network that GCP is using was built before GCP, because it's what they use for Google. So it's pretty neat, and they have this global network super well made. In AWS, there are a lot of things that are really good and pretty neat. But there are a lot of changes every single day. I remember that back in 2019, I think, by December 3rd, I remember that because it's my birthday, AWS released something called cross-region transit gateway. Before that event, when you were using a transit gateway, you were unable to have a transit gateway cross-region, so you needed to have a really weird connection to have to try to have a hub and spoke topology. It always ended in a star topology, in a spaghetti topology, but anyhow. So how do you manage your network topology? Means, hey, how are you interconnecting everything that you have in the cloud? How are you handling the public IP addresses, the private IP addresses? Because again, right, one of the worst things that could happen when you are in AWS and you're growing and growing and growing, what is it? Yeah, overlapping CIDR blocks, right? Overlapping CIDR blocks is usually messy. So you try to understand if they have do you have an IPAM, right? How are you documenting everything that you have deployed? And if not, you need to create something to do so, right? Or you need at least to create the process. This is mostly not about spinning something and saying, hey, yeah, I want an EKS. This is about designing something, which means you need to pay a lot of attention on how the process that the customer is doing, how they are doing it, and how they are controlling that. Another question, obviously, for the reliability is, how does your system adapt to changes in demand, right? So when you have more traffic, how does your system react? Do you have the ability even to have more than one server? Maybe they are running on EC2, but maybe they are not even running on an auto-scaling group, right? I'm not talking about having that containerized. So maybe they don't have, maybe their system doesn't adapt at all. Maybe that's why you are there, right? And even if they actually ask you out to say, hey, could you help me on this because I have this issue, you need to make the question anyhow. Another question will be, how do you monitor your resources? One of the key topics for any SRE, and I think that this is one of the most important topics for anyone being a DevOps architect or SRE or whatever, is observability, right? Metrics, logs, and traces. Do you have that in place, right? Do you all your system that this is super this ends up being super simple to deploy. Okay, if you're running Kubernetes, you have a lot of platforms. If you're running plain AWS, it's just about you using the services, CloudWatch, X-Ray, whatnot. Obviously, CloudWatch metrics and logs. But again, it's something super easy to implement, and it is something super that will provide a lot of value to your customers and to you, and obviously for the reliability, and you need to keep this in mind if it's not in place already. For the performance efficiency design principles, one question will be, how do you select the best performing architecture, right? And this is a question that will get a little bit messy. So how do you select the best performing architecture? Will be, what are the things that makes you think that this is the best performing for your business needs, right? Often multiple approaches are required to get optimal performance across your workload. If maybe me 5 years back or 7 years back, I will say, yeah, no, I need to not be down, not a second, and that this will be the best performing because I will be working on a full SQL database that has an async way of making queries and transactions. And nowadays I will say, yeah, well, no, my best performing will be if this is not something that requires consistency, I will go for NoSQL because for me, it will perform better. It will handle the operations in a better way. It will make me fully scalable. I won't need to worry about the schema. If I need to enforce a transaction, I will do so. So you need to understand how they are selecting the best performing application, and you need to understand that. Our question will be for the performance efficiency, how do you select your compute solution, right? Now we have serverless, containers, EC plain, EC2 instances, and whatnot. Why do they prefer, how they select that, right? What's driving their decision towards one or another? And you need to understand it. Because that will help you build your architecture in a way that they will be happy with it, and you will be improving their architectures, and you will explain why, maybe why not. This will be the same, for example, for how do you select your storage solution or your database solution? Those are questions as well for this pillar. And one important thing is keep always the customer in mind when you're asking this. Now for the last one, for cost optimization. Cost optimization is usually one that I do not like that much, but one of the questions is, for example, how do you govern usage, right? This is about establishing policies and mechanisms to ensure that appropriate costs are incurred while objectives are achieved. So how do you tackle who is using what and how they are deploying that, right? Another question will be, how do you monitor usage and cost? Again, this is the same thing, even though it was observability for the application, this is the same thing for usage and cost. I mentioned this, AWS budgets and cost explorer, super good things to know, but you need to understand how they are monitoring at the moment their expenditures. Another question is, how do you decommission resources? How do you make sure that the resources are shut down, or maybe that the account is accessible or that is closed? How are you handling your projects toward the end of life cycle? All right. And I think that even though this is the fourth question, this is one of the most important ones. And how do you evaluate cost when you select services? And this is super important, right? EC2, EBS, S3 are building blocks, AWS services, but managed services such as RDS for the databases, DynamoDB, are higher level application level. That again, it removes the effort of operating it, right? And you need to understand how your customers or your team is actually evaluating the overall costs. So now that we have went through those, let's talk about engagement best practices. So Understand the customer business, product solution, and future plans, right? This is key to your success and your customer success. Remember, I'm talking about the customer, but this could be for your company, not your customer. It is because I usually work for customers, so that's why. If you do not understand the business, you will be trying to achieve things that are way beyond your customer focus. You will be diverging a path and assisting your customers to climb a mountain when they actually need to go underground, maybe. So keep in mind the destination, your customer's destination. Architecture diagram, self-review, right? While working in the architecture diagram, take a blame-free approach, right? Nobody knows everything, and we are basically here due to that. And we need to help them feel comfortable talking about their mistakes, their issues. If your customer is hiding something, for example, it could make your design not even be applicable to the use case. So when you're talking to make your customers feel super comfortable talking with you, and please understand that everyone is trying to do what they know best, all right? Start with operational excellence. I mentioned this. So just asking, for example, if the platform works at the moment will not work. But the idea is that if the main platform doesn't work, we have a lot to dig into. Ask questions, provide context, explain risk and best practices, take notes. I cannot highlight this enough. It is super important that we are being active listeners while talking with our customers. We need to ask for context. They sometimes answer a question, but it's like the 5 wise strategies. You might be aware of it when you're doing an RSA or not. We need to feel certainty that we address our questions, explain the best practices if there are any misunderstandings regarding how to leverage the cloud provider services, but try to get in depth about the answer that your customer is providing to you, right? If you're asking, for example, hey, how do you measure your success, all right? They will say, I measure my success by how many sales I have. All right, and how does that translate? How is your process of selling, and how the platform, the architecture that we are reviewing interacts with this selling strategy that you have? And you need to understand how everything ties together, because if you have a blind spot, again, I said this about the blame-free approach. Remember that your architecture and the architecture that you are thinking depends on the information that has been provided to you. If the information has been tainted or there is no information regarding some topics, have another call, have another conversation, and you need to be sure that you feel comfortable with the information that you need. Due diligence, right? Read-only access and third-party tools. Keep this in mind, and always try to leverage read-only access or third-party tools. You won't need more than that. To check what we need to go ahead, a few meetings and read-only will suffice. Some customers have third-party tools that help you gather information quickly. Do not underestimate those. You might have a hard time because you will need to learn a new platform, but they are usually pretty good, right? CrowdStrike is one that is super easy to see that, and I had my time working on it, but there are a lot of tools and they are usually pretty neat, and they are experts on doing that. So that doesn't mean that you need to use something like that, right? That means, hey, take this as something that could actually ease in the burden. Prioritize and create a scope of work. Short-term, medium-term, long-term improvements. This is super important. Again, think about quick wins, low-hanging fruits. Think about short, medium, and long-term. There are things that require to move the entire organization, right? There are some changes that will require that. Try to tackle everything but that at the beginning. One of the hardest things to do in a company is not to change. It's not to change a platform or refactoring. No, it's to change the culture. When you're switching or you're creating a new architecture, I said this. Keep in mind the user anyhow. So, but there are some changes that will be beneficial for everyone, really beneficial. And that will make a change in the culture. And if that's the case, remember, this is a hard change that needs a lot of your soft skills, and you need to talk a lot about that, and you need to take your time on it. So I'm saying, hey, tackle the low-hanging fruits. This is because I usually think about the Pareto's law. 80% of the outcome comes from 20% of the effort. So try to tackle that first. Try to find out those 20% of the effort that will get you and your customers the 80% of the outcome. All right. Create milestones. It is pretty much basic, but it is important for you and your customers to have a roadmap, to understand the deliverables and what they should receive from your end. All right. And as a professional, always honor those milestones. So this is a list of resources. I will be sharing this, and if there is any question or anything that might have come to your mind during today's workshop, I sincerely hope. I know that I hope that I haven't talked that fast. So I hope that you were able to write your questions without losing everything. But if you wrote some of the questions, this is now the time for me to see those. Dave, is there any question for me in the chat?
Hola, Jonathan. Yo anoté un par de preguntas en función de algunos comentarios. Perdón que había en mi cámara, estaba sin cámara.
No.
Tengo dos preguntas por ahí que intuí que podrían ser interesantes. Una que es a título personal, me interesa a mí. Si tenés alguna recomendación específica metodológica en cuanto a cómo hacer capacity planning.
A ver, con lo que es, dame un segundo de prendo mi cámara también, si me ven despeinado. Yo voy a hacerme un corte como el tuyo, Carlos. Bien, una de las cosas que hablábamos de capacity planning es el tema de, y lo hablamos en una partecita que es, se hace capacity planning, tratar de testear, tratar de entender production. Antes que nada, para hacer capacity planning, para poder planificar tenés que observar, ¿no? Entonces viene la parte del measure, que ahí viene la parte de metrics, loss and traces. O sea, tenés que, traces no, vamos a dejar traces de lado. Traces es para cuando querés facilitar un montón de cosas, así que vamos a hablar de metrics particularmente. Tenés que tener un historial de métricas que ha pasado durante un tiempo, o sea, así es como yo empezaría, o por lo menos como lo he hecho. Un historial de métricas, entonces uno puede sacar un historial de métricas, mientras más tiempo es mejor, porque hay empresas que tienen ciertos ciclos. Particularmente, yo trabajaba para una empresa bueno, para Visa, y obviamente teníamos un día al año que era un pico. Navidad era el pico transaccional. Entonces, teníamos que, si vos veías en julio y decías, bueno, en base a julio voy a hacer mi capacity planning, te ibas a perder el pico de diciembre y no vas a poder verlo. Entonces, mientras más tiempo, mejor. Sin embargo, y esto es medio como es un mix and match, lo que te permite la parte de poder irte a la cloud es que el capacity planning queda como de segundo lado un poco. Porque uno puede empezar, y como tenés todo que es on demand, lo máximo que puedes hacer después es entender cómo son los workloads para, por ejemplo, pasarlo a reserve o pasarlo a spot instances, ¿no? Que serían dos metodologías distintas. Entonces, hacer tanto capacity planning para cosas que pueden ajustarse elásticamente por las características particulares e intrínsecas de estar en la nube, no termina teniendo tanto sentido como que fuese un stopper. Obviamente está bueno tenerlo y está bueno organizarlo, y una vez que estás en la nube, ya las métricas las tenés, después las tenés que guardar y tenés que garantizarte de tenerlas y poder evaluarlas con el tiempo, pero capacity planning queda en un segundo lado. No es el caso también, por ejemplo, si vas a DynamoDB. Ahora me voy a hablar un poquito de AWS medio específico para guiarnos en la conversación, pero DynamoDB vos podés ir por dos modelos. Podés ir por uno on demand, que te permite que vos tengas esta elasticidad, pero sale carísimo, o podés definir vos cuántos read and writes vas a manejar en tu tabla, ¿no? Entonces ahí capaz que sí lo necesitas, pero si estás pensando en ir a NoSQL. Si estás pensando en ir a NoSQL y que sea DynamoDB, porque tranquilamente puedes ir a Mongo Atlas y te olvidaste. Depende mucho de para qué approach. Lo importante de vuelta es capacity planning siempre va a ser la parte de métricas, empezar por la parte de métricas y pasado, y en base a eso poder definir el camino hacia el futuro.
Está buena esa reflexión tuya sobre la importancia de medir y contar con métricas. Creo que eso es fundamental para cualquier cosa. Hace un tiempo leí de una cuestión vinculada a Capacity Planning que era curiosa porque no tenía que ver con la capacity en sí, sino por el saldo que tenían en la cuenta de AWS, y en realidad no fue que se quedaron sin capacity, sino que se quedaron sin plata.
En verdad, eso pasa en Azure. En Azure pasa eso. En AWS no, AWS te cobra a final de mes. O sea, olvidate, vos gastás, te cobra a final. En Azure, vos tenés
Azure.
una...
Sí.
Sí, en Azure vos podés hacer un Enterprise Agreement que te permite tener ese saldo y decir, bueno, yo cargo el saldo para acá. También lo hace una plataforma que se llama VMC at AWS, que es la parte de VMware Cloud con AWS, que cuando trabajas con VMware ellos te dan un crédito y te dicen, bueno, vos podés gastar tanto crédito, tanta plata, y eso se representa en tantos hosts dentro de VMware en AWS. Muy copado.
¿Está bien? Como el teléfono, tengo que ponerle saldo a la aplicación para sobrevivir.
Olvídate, no, voy por prepago, sí, ya está. Tengo un prepago. Ahora que me vine a Uruguay, tengo un prepago. Olvídate. Sí.
Es que sabiéndolo no es una mala opción para nada. Probablemente la mejor manera de controlar tus costos.
Es que tenés un tema, porque podés poner en AWS, no, en la AWS la verdad es que no, te permite, vos inclusive poner un budget y te va a avisar, pero no, vos vas a poder seguir espiando cosas. Vos podés seguir levantando, y por eso ha pasado un montón de veces que, y ahí vamos un poco al pilar de security, donde se han filtrado claves, y eso ha pasado en empresas donde yo he trabajado, en otras empresas de la misma empresa madre, que se habían filtrado y habían empezado a generar instancias para minar criptomoneda. Y claro, en AWS no le importa. O sea, después te pasa el bill. Él te dice, tome acá, señor, aquí viene $300.000. Y vos decís, pero ¿cómo puede ser?
Después te bajás el PDF ese a fin de mes y te querés matar.
Te querés matar y ves una línea que dice $283.000 y te decís, ¿cómo me voy a pegar un corchazo? Claro.
Me voy a pegar un corchazo y vuelvo. Sí, tal cual.
Claro, es muy así.
La otra pregunta que tenía por ahí también está a título personal. Me perdí por ahí si capaz la mencionaste, en una de esas la mencionaste, y es una cosa que siempre me llamó la atención, o me quedó siempre en la cabeza de un capítulo de Polémica en Parrabar, que hacían referencia a una metodología que ellos le llamaban, no sé si es una palabra común o era, le inventaron ellos, que le llamaban monkey testing, en la cual...
Monkey
de mono, exactamente.
Sí, no, claro, lo mencioné cuando hablaba de Simian Army, hablé un poquito de la Simian Army de Netflix, que de hecho es uno de los tópicos que creo que lo pongo, no me acuerdo si pongo acá, creo que lo pongo en las... no, lo tendría que haber puesto, después lo agrego. Que es justo cómo testear tu reliability, ¿no? Cómo testear tu resiliencia y la capacidad de tu plataforma de poder volver y de que soporte cualquier tipo de cosas, no solamente las que a vos se te ocurren. Cuando trabajaba en Visa, nosotros teníamos un requerimiento muy alto de disponibilidad, y tenía un gerente, genio total, que me decía que la manera de él de probar, pero genio en serio, porque para la época, que fue hace como 10 años ya, muy avanzado, y decía, agarré y desconectalo. No pongas shutdown. No, andá y pateá el servidor. En ese momento teníamos cluster de VMware y fíjate cómo reacciona. Y era productivo. Fue genial. Esa fue una de las mejores épocas. Esto es muy parecido, pero obviamente acá lo que puedes hacer es garantizarte una automation alrededor de eso que pueda generar cierto havoc, cierto caos dentro de tu plataforma y que no sea controlado. O sea, una vez que vos te organizás, mi plataforma es resiliente, deja que ejecute lo que tenga que ejecutar. Y si se rompe algo, que se rompa. Y veamos cómo lo arreglamos. Porque de ahí viene la parte de aprender del fallo, ¿no? Que también lo mencionaba un poco durante este workshop.
Sí. Hay modos de fallo que son difíciles de identificar, que se componen de la combinación de una multiplicidad de cosas, de que en realidad no sé, a mí no se me ocurre por lo menos mucha otra forma que identificarlos de que empezar a probar cosas, porque...
claro, es que termina siendo muy randomized.
Un ejercicio de pizarrón, decir, ay, bueno, ¿y cómo se puede romper esto? Decir, bueno, si se me rompe la base de datos, si se me rompe el engine aquí, pues son todas las cosas que no se le ocurre, y el problema son los modos de fallo que ocurren. Claro.
Pasa mucho, y uno tiene que tener en cuenta cuando habla de eso el Recovery Time Objective, ¿no? Y el Recovery Point Objective, que es el RTO y el RPO, ¿no? Uno tiene que tener en cuenta eso cuando uno quiere generar estos fallos random. Y también uno tiene que pensar los tipos de fallos que desencadenan una cosa o la otra. Que si te apaga un servidor es una cosa, pero si hablamos de ransomware y se te encriptan todos los archivos es otra. Y si se te corrompe una base de datos, por más que tengas una réplica sincrónica, le va a importar muy poco. O sea, se te va a romper, bro. Y hay un montón de cosas que uno tiene que estar al tanto y tiene que saber cómo pensarlo y tiene que saber cómo probarlo, ¿no? Porque vos decís, apago un servidor de base de datos. Ah, listo, mi base de datos están cubiertas. No, bro. Te entra un ransom, te rompió la base. Perdiste. No hay chance. Si vos pensás que porque levanta de vuelta anda bien. Tenés que tener un backup. Entonces, hay que pensar en todo eso y ver cómo recuperarlo. Y después, el backup sea automático, pero que no entre por cualquier cosa. Y uno tiene que tener mucho cuidado con los backups. Cuando haces un deploy, y lo mencionaba un poco cuando haces la parte de CI/CD, y llegás a la parte de implementación en una base de datos, SQL, ya sea Postgres, MySQL, lo que sea, que son métodos ácidos, ahí vos podés cambiar el esquema en un deployment y la podés romper. Ahora, ¿cómo volvés para atrás? Es otro tema. Porque capaz vos haces el deployment en producción y no lo testeaste bien, por eso es muy importante la parte de testeo, y entró una transacción con un esquema distinto y después cómo volvés para atrás. Muy difícil.
Sí, tal cual. Tengo un par de comentarios. Acá uno que me hizo mucha gracia, que refiere a lo que hablábamos al principio del tema de los costos y el billing, que es cuando le llegaba a mi viejo lo que yo compraba en Steam. Me hizo mucha gracia eso.
Claro,
Gracias.
sí.
Gracias, Santiago, porque me hiciste reír.
Claro, sí. Y en un momento me acuerdo que Steam no te permitía, en Argentina por lo menos, te impactaba el saldo de dólares que podías comprar. Así que eso
claro. Esa no me tocó. La que me tocó, que yo le comentaba a Santiago, que cuando yo era chico, la internet era por teléfono dedicado. Entonces, cuando llegaba la factura del teléfono, mi vieja me quería matar.
No? En Argentina teníamos alternativa gratis. Cuando no tenías un contrato de móvil, de 56K, me acuerdo. Lo viví. Parezco joven por la cámara nomás, pero soy grande, che.
Bueno, es buena tu cámara, después pasame la marca del modelo.
Sí, es una Razer 15 Advance, con la RTX.
Yo te paso el contacto de mi peluquero.
Esa me gustó, esa me gustó. Ey. Igual me das un poco de estrés y quedo así, no pasa nada.
Está bien. Bueno, acá hay un comentario más de Mariano que dice que esta charla se complementa bien con la de ayer de Escalando al Infinito, que es cierto, yo estuve en esa como asistente, y es cierto, hay como una cierta continuidad temática entre las dos que está buena, que me parece que es accidental en cierto sentido.
Lo hicimos a propósito.
A propósito.
Nosotros hablamos con todos los organizadores de Nerdearla para ver cómo podíamos arquitectar que una persona que haya asistido a la charla de ayer, Escalando al Infinito, y esta se complementan.
Excelente.
Soné muy confiado, ¿no?
Sí, absolutamente. Casi te creí, por un instante te creí.
Gracias.
Bueno, notable, Jonathan.
Bueno, Carlos.
No tengo muchos más comentarios, así que me parece que te liberamos a vos, y lo dejo a Miguel que haga el cierre oficial. Miguel, ¿estás por ahí?
Dale.
Sí, acá estoy. Bueno, gracias a todas y a todos por haber participado. Espero que lo hayan disfrutado. Queda mucho más de nerdearla. Los esperamos en alguna charla o workshop. Chequeen la agenda. Muchas gracias, Jonathan, nuevamente por ser parte de Nerdearla 2021.
Un placer, Mike.
Nos vemos.
Cuídense, chicos.
Gracias a todos. Chau, chau.